Welcome to Brighter Morning with Bo. I am Bo Tiwari, your host this morning, and our guest this morning is Dr. Bishnu Ragoonath, a political scientist at the University of the West Indies. And we will talk to him about the political context of the budget, how he saw it before the budget was read, how he sees the budget in that process, and how he sees the political fallout, responses, receptivity, etc., of the budget as read on October 4th by Honorable Minister of Finance, Colm Imbert. So we welcome Mr. Ragoonath, Dr. Ragoonath now. Dr. Ragoonath, good morning.
Yes. Good morning. Thank you for being on your show.
Yeah, let's raise the volume so we can hear him better. Thank you for coming on the show. You've had a chance to look at the budget?
I've looked at some of the documents on the budget, yes.
What is your initial impression? And I imagine you'd look at it from an economic point of view, but dominantly from, as a political scientist would, what is likely to be the political thinking and the political impact of the budget?
Okay, so let's start where we were supposed to have started. That is supposedly the economic aspect of the budget. Noting the state of the economy of the country, one would have expected the Minister of Finance would have focused a lot on how we're going to restart a stalled economy for all intents and purposes. And what, to me, I was hearing in his presentation was more about the politics rather than the economics in restarting the economy, a stalled economy. Because what I saw was simply, the emphasis was simply saying, how do we get people and really and truly its supporters out of this morass that we are in, bearing in mind that it's going to be easy in the next few years, and well, at least for the upcoming financial year, and in years to come. And more importantly, what sort of political lifelines are we going to throw out there for the citizenry, to let them know that we are there with them and we are hoping and talking to them and so forth. And that is, I think, the political aspect of it. And I say that largely because I was first taken aback when the budget started off with, the expenditure. We still went to a $52 billion budget. And in that context, one would have expected that the Minister of Finance would have been trying to reduce the expenditure on the budget and minimize the deficit. But and in fact, since the PNM won the election way back in 2015, there was that concern that we had an overinflated budget and we needed to bring it back into line with what the society needs. But unfortunately, the Minister of Finance went ahead with the same type of budget allocations and expenditure, and more critically, and this was the part that I really found interesting, was the heavy emphasis that he placed on energy and the fact that oil and gas prices have gone up. And in that context, we could simply continue at the rate at which we're going, when we all knew from way back when we cannot be trusting of putting all our eggs in the oil and gas basket. And more importantly, we had to start diversifying, and I was not seeing that coming out in this budget.
Okay, so in your view, given our current environment, given the COVID situation and all of these issues, you think that the budget is bad economics because the Minister of Finance was striving for what he saw as good politics for the party in government?
To a large extent, yes. It was good politics for the party in government because basically he provided the citizen with what we call a satisficing budget. Not a satisfying one, a satisficing one. So the poor man, the people at the lower rungs of the society cannot complain because we have removed VAT, or at least so we were told. We have removed VAT from and zero rated VAT on basic food items. Mind you, several of these food items, if I'm reading the newspapers correctly, they are saying that several of these items were already zero rated. So I'm not sure exactly how much of it we've gone to zero rated. But the point about it is simply one which says, so a poor person cannot complain. A poor person cannot complain when you talk about the cash cards which are supposed to go in or which they are supposed to get when we have the rise in the utility rates, WASA and TNTech. A poor person cannot complain when the same cash cards, when they go to the fuel and fuel at the pump is being liberalized and they have to pay more for gas. But then we tell you, we give you a cash card. And the question is, and this is the real politics out of this. Whereas that is what is being marketed and projected for the wider society, we have always known that there have been serious problems in the implementation in an equitable manner for all citizens to benefit from these perks or these benefits that the government seems to be giving out. So we have seen it when we had the massive floodings, for instance. We still have people in Trinidad and Tobago today who have not yet gotten monies from the 2018 floods. We know what the implementation challenges have been, and we know how it has been politicized to some extent. And that is the context in which, when he presented his budget statement, yes, it sounded all well and nice and good. The challenge, however, is when we talk about implementation and equitable implementation. That is where I see a real problem arising.
Talk to me about this equitability factor and the extent to which you see bias based on political considerations in the budget. You've mentioned some, but I mean, one might argue that those are things to buttress the economic condition of the poor. And I think the minister made a big deal of that in his presentation as well. But you think there is bias in the budget? And if there is, how do you, first of all, identify the political bias? And let's talk through it a little bit.
No, okay, so let's be clear. The budget statement itself does not predict any bias. The budget statement itself tells us that these are some of the things that we're going to do, and if those policies are implemented even-handedly across the board, I have no problem with it. I would be very much so happy and say, well, yes, the budget is a budget for all. Unfortunately, however, we also have to be aware of how things have happened in this country and how things continue to happen. And it is in that context we raise the questions as to whether there is that equality. So, okay, so let me give you probably a bad example. Several years ago, there were complaints by citizens when they went to HDC, for instance, and were looking for application forms. They could not get it as readily as they can. Mind you, other people were getting it. And the question is, how was this being managed and supervised so that there was that equitable distribution of simply the application form? And I use that as an example to illustrate And again, I referenced earlier the flooding issues when we had the flooding in Greenville and the flooding in St. Helena and so forth. And we heard people in St. Helena and those areas which were not necessarily, or which are normally deemed to be opposition territory, still complaining today that they have not yet received even the funding from that was allocated to them. And that is where we are talking about the budget statement. I can't implicate the budget statement to say that the budget statement itself indicates and implies bias. What I'm concerned about, however, is that we know how things have been rolled out, and that is where there's that concern as to how it's going to be rolled out. When we talk about pandemic relief, for instance, we still have people from 2020 who have not yet gotten their pandemic relief, but yet still we have people in 2021 getting their reliefs. Now, question, would the people who didn't get it in 2020, how were they expected to survive into 2021? Weren't they suffering the same fate? And that is the challenge that I have in terms of having a nice broad policy. On paper, it looks very good. The implementation, however, is where I have a serious concern.
Okay. What about the fact that one might say, looking at the budget, that there seemed to be a decisive shift in favor of private sector business this time? There are a lot of incentives for the manufacturing sector, for the productive sector. There are concessions that have been made. There are special provisions for small and medium enterprises, which means that the minister would have listened to many of the cries of business. You think that's a positive step for the company, for the government, and for the companies that are going to be affected?
Definitely, that is a good thing for the companies to be affected, that will be affected. It is good that we are hearing that the government is going that route and would probably be giving those sorts of benefits to the citizenry. So, at least to the manufacturing sector. And we heard not only about manufacturing, the whole issue about all those small and medium enterprises that will be going into technology and digital transformation and so forth.
That's right.
And all of that is good. And I mean, those are things that I readily support and say, I am not necessarily saying it is more business oriented, because for all intents and purposes, we need to start up small business enterprises. We need to support the small entrepreneurs. And in that regard, yes, those policies would be helpful to set up small entrepreneurs. The challenge, however, with that, bear in mind the state of the economy. Some of those businesses that they talked about, for instance, so, okay, for instance, let's just talk about the digital transformation and the companies, small enterprises that were going to set up these small enterprises. And we heard about the $100,000 tax free in the first year and $200,000 in the second year. It would mean that people have to come up with at least that capital budget to start their businesses. Question is, how many people are willing to invest at this point in time in setting up businesses like those when they are still very much so unsure as to how this economy will strive in the not too distant future? And will we see the kind of turnaround that we need to see? I mean, let me tell you something. There seems to be a serious uh, crisis when we listen to the Minister of Finance over the years. And I don't know if you recall 2 years ago, 3 years ago, he says, we actually turned around. We can see clearly now.
Yes.
And in those instances, things did not get better, rather they got worse. And in the context of saying that credibility issue of what the Minister of Finance is telling us, it remains an issue. So will I, as a small private person, want to go now and invest money in the limited funds that I have into a business where I am not even sure that the country is going to be able to support such businesses? And yes, we are hearing the government saying, yes, we want to go digital and everything like that, and that is good. But by the time we get in there, is the market saturated already? And that's a challenge that people will have to understand.
Yeah, the issue that you raise, I have no doubt that the minister tried to inject a certain amount of confidence in the economy by making these incentives available for private sector. But I think there are two things that we have to take into account in this matter of confidence. Secondly, the policies from 2016. First, the policy from 2016 to the present time. And in this seventh budget, a kind of departure in favor of the private sector, but really a lot of taxes and a lot of contention between the private sector and government before. And secondly, the question of whether what the government has sought to do now in relation to the private sector to stimulate revival and growth, whether that is now going to be a consistent policy. You think there's a credibility gap based on the precedents of the last 6 years and on the uncertainty of, let's say, the next 3 or 4?
Definitely, there's a credibility gap, and let me just use a simple example to illustrate this. And when you talk about the consistency of policy, the simple issue. 2 years ago, if I remember correctly, the government came out and in the same budget statement came out and says we're going to remove the motor vehicle taxes and duties on electric vehicles. A year later, we come back and we replace them, or we brought them back on. And this year we go back now and we take them back out. Where's the consistency? I mean, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we were all aware that the world is moving into electric vehicles. That did not change last year. But up came the Minister of Finance and saying, stopping it now. The concession I gave you all last year, it's no longer available. Then you come back this year now and you give back the concession. And that is the context in which that credibility issue comes to the fore. That credibility issue comes to the fore, and people are concerned. So the Minister of Finance says, we're going to tell you, okay, fine, we're going to do some things, and we're going to review some of these things in 3 years' time down the road. But we're not even sure whether we could wait for 3 years, because chances are it could change within a year. We don't know, and those are the real concerns that I would have with regard to the budget and the Minister of Finance's credibility in how he sells this budget to the citizenry.
Yeah, I think that is an important intangible issue that you are raising there. The credibility on policy and the consistency really on policy. These are very, very important issues for confidence building. And then the government had this very, in my view, very untenable and negative relationship with the private sector, they would ignore them, they would marginalize them, they would not listen to them, sometimes they'd quarrel with them, attacking individuals, for instance, in the business sector. Yet at the same time, I think in the pandemic, the government basically found that they could not, in fact, deliver the vaccines, even though after a long period they got it, because they needed help, and they found the private sector to be a very effective and efficient partner in the delivery of vaccines. Now, one would think that the government would want to build on that in order to build a partnership of some kind, and we have public-private partnerships which they are going to engage, although we have no procurement bill ready. I mean, the regulations are still to be approved by Parliament, and I think that there are a second set of regulations as well. And you have a situation where all of this is going on, and you do not know, as you yourself are saying, and I think this is important, whether the Minister of Finance will be consistent, the government will be consistent and persistent, and whether the private sector would be given the space that now seems to be opening up. And I think that issue of the credibility gap is really an intangible that could undermine the best intentions of this budget. And that takes me to another question. I mean, do you think that the behavior of the government towards the population in the past is going to affect the way we are able to manage our situation to opening up? And do you think that vaccine hesitancy is part of that response to the way the government behaves towards the population? I don't know how included the trade union movement feels. They have made the commitment to look at pensions of the daily paid and to start negotiations with the PSA. But I don't know, in terms of stakeholder management, do you think the climate is right politically to be able to do some things for the country together?
The climate is right for them to do things, for the country to do things together. However, again, the challenge remains as to whether or not that the policies that have been adopted and implemented by the government encourages and entices people to join in that partnership with the government. I have heard, for instance, commentary on the budget, and I mean, from some of the Tobago Chamber people who have been complaining that, look, whatever the Minister of Finance says, he says, you know, because we have to live and we have to continue to try to survive. And in the context of we having to try to survive, he could say what he wants, and we will leave him be and let him make his own statements and pronouncements. But whether we will take whatever is given to us and we will work with it. Now, for instance, you have several of the chambers came out and says, good budget. And I have no problem with that, because they were seeing things in the context of simply saying, well, he's given some incentives to manufacturing and so forth and small business, and that is well and good. But the question is, will there be that willingness to participate? The trade unions have already throw their marker down and say, well, look, we don't really trust this government. And even though the Minister of Finance went to the Parliament and said, I have instructed the CPA to start negotiations in 2022 for all the outstanding collective agreements. Bear in mind several things. Starting negotiations does not mean to say that we will complete them. We didn't say when we're going to start negotiations. It is the same thing that when we talked about property taxes coming. We've been hearing property taxes coming 2 years ago. We heard it back again last year. We heard it again this year. And now the Minister of Finance says, well, yeah, it's coming in 2022, you know. But we can't exactly tell you when because we have to wait till we get 50% of the properties on the roll. And I agree with that. And in the like manner, he says, I have instructed the CPO to start negotiations in 2022. Does that mean that the CPO is going to start negotiations? Well, we talk about 2022, we're talking fiscal year 2022, which effectively starts now. But will the CPO be in readiness to start real negotiations until in the first quarter, the second quarter, the third quarter, or the fourth quarter? And more importantly, everybody, from the smallest child, knows that the economy is in a challenging situation. So you started negotiations. What are you going to be offering? 000? Is that the offer on the table, and is that your negotiating starting point? And I mean, we have heard it before from Coleman, but 000. So we have to ask ourselves that question now. Starting negotiations doesn't necessarily mean things are going to change for the better for anybody. And I think that's where the trade unions accept the fact that we don't take what the minister says at face value. We have
Welcome to Lifetime Solutions, where you can trust your roof to us. Our services include custom fabrication, steel framing, roofing installation, on-site roll forming, roofing maintenance and services. Call 223-ROOF or 223-7663 for a quote today, or visit our website www.lifetimesolutionst.com. Lifetime Solutions. You can trust your roof to us. Call 223-ROOF or 223-7663 for a quote today, or visit our website www.lifetimesolutionstt.com.
Your house is more than just a home. It's the new normal. It's your place of work, your kids' school, and even your gym. It's where you and your family spend most of your time. With over 43 years in the building service industry, let Magic Mist Services Limited take care of your home cleaning and maintenance needs. From ceiling to floor, interior and exterior, allowing you to focus on what matters most to you. Give us a call. Magic Mist Services Limited, your total facilities management solutions provider.
You did the right thing. So now we're giving you things. Republic Bank thanks you and wants to reward you for getting vaxxed. Win $5,000 in prizes every week, plus one of 2 cars in December. You took care of your health, and now we're taking care of you. $5,000 and a chance to win a car. See press and log on to republictt.com for details.
Mangalese Trading Company Limited. Specialist in PVC ceiling, gypsum ceiling, suspended ceilings, medallions, lights, metal framings, and SPCS flooring, known as vinyl plank. Now introducing Mangalese Foods, wholesale and retail, distributor of the family brand food items. Our range of products include rice, sugar, chickpeas, split peas, and soybean oil. Mangalese Foods deliver exceptional products. We offer timely and efficient service. We are located at 9 Francis Lala Road, Charlieville, Chaguanas. Contact us at 672-9889, 740-5569, or 336-4373.
Mangalese Trading Company Limited.
Good morning. Welcome back. This is Brighter Morning with Bo. I am Bo Tiwari. We are talking to Dr. Bishnu Ragoonath. We've lost him, and we don't seem able to get him back on the line. So we will have to close that interview. I'm sorry, because that interview was very important, because Dr. Ragoonath was raising an important issue of credibility required to turn talk into action and to get support in order to achieve anything in this society, and it is something worth considering. I want to say that the budget has gotten mixed reviews, and it will continue to get mixed reviews, because there are some good things in the budget and some bad things in the budget. I don't know whether the opposition, in their response, the leader of the opposition speaks on Friday, is going to acknowledge anything good in the budget or will simply criticize. And I don't know if she would make any alternative suggestions. But the point is that the budget has been read now. We know what the budget holds. We know where the focus is. And the question is now whether that can take us, and this is the real issue, take us from a situation in which everybody has been in survival mode to a point where every citizen can become resilient, every family can become resilient, every community can become resilient. Because the theme of the budget is resilience in the face of the pandemic. So what is that resilience for? It's not just the national economy. And how would the national economy become resilient if our institutions were not resilient, if our businesses were not resilient, if our capacity in the society to govern and to do things in the society were not resilient, if the trade unions were not resilient, if the workers were not resilient, if the people were not resilient. That is the real problem. And the question is whether we will have that resilience across the board in the society based on this budget. There are many slip between the cup and the lip. And we have to be very careful as we manage and monitor this process over the next year. And we will see how it emerges. We'll ask some of the ministers if they will come. We will have a talk with them to find out how they are going to implement. I want to thank you very much for watching this morning. I'm sorry that we didn't get to conclude properly our discussion with Dr. Ragoonath, but we thank you for watching. This is Brighter Morning with Bo, and I am Bo Tiwari.